Writer's Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands.
Hi, I'm Tracey Grice and welcome to the Writer's Read podcast. One of the quotes that inspires me in my practice as a teacher, in fact it's the one that sits front and centre of my desk at school, is written by Nancy Atwell, an internationally acclaimed author, and she says that for students of every ability and background, it's the simple, miraculous act of reading a good book that turns them into readers. Because even for the least experienced, most reluctant reader, it's the one good book that changes everything. The job of adults who care about reading is to move heaven and earth to put that book into a child's hands. And that's why this podcast exists. On the Writer's Read podcast today, I'm talking to South Australian author Adam Cece. As our reader in residence, Adam will be sharing his reading life with us and reading an excerpt from his award-winning book, The Extremely Weird Thing That Happened in Huggabie Falls. We had such a great chat, and here's a preview of what's to come in this episode of Writer's Read.
My earliest memories of reading are a little bit horrific because it's the fear that I would never actually be able to pick up reading. Even though my mum assured me that I would, I was always petrified that I wouldn't be able to read.
Also, on each Writer's Read podcast, we have our Rebecca Recommends segment with children's literature guru Rebecca Bird, who shares her insights on other titles written by our reader in residence. Now we are hearing from Adam Cece. Adam and his family live in Adelaide, South Australia, and he's been writing for more than 30 years. He writes books, screenplays, and knows how to write a cracking shopping list. In 2017, his book, The Extremely Weird Thing That Happened in Huggabie Falls, was shortlisted and won the 2017 Tex Prize. This achievement led to Adam signing a 3-book deal with Tex Publishing for the Huggabie Falls series, and at the time of producing this podcast, we're lucky enough to have the first 2 books in this series published. Adam is a member of the SA Writers Centre, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and the Echidnas. So Adam, the research around reading aloud is really well documented, and in my job I get to see the benefit in children's development when they hear books read aloud, and you know it's usually around children developing a positive attitude towards books and reading. And hearing a book read out loud by the author who wrote it is a real treat. And perhaps for a child to hear that, it lures them into reading. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the book that you've chosen to read out loud for our listeners today.
Yeah, I'm going to just read a little bit from The Extremely Weird Thing That Happened in Huggabie Falls. And it's the start of a 3-book series that Tex Publishing is bringing out. And it's all these things that happened in Huggabie Falls. Okay, so this is chapter 1 of The Extremely Weird Thing That Happened in Huggabie Falls. And it's called The Capital of New Zealand. Kip Kindle always knew his family wasn't like other families. They were weird. In fact, they were probably the weirdest family on earth. It was just as well they lived in the town of Huggabie Falls, because Huggabie Falls was the weirdest place on earth. Take Mrs. Turgan, for example, the teacher who was also a witch. Then there was the factory that existed in another dimension, the bottomless river, the topless hill, the train tunnel to nowhere, and the fact that every Sunday got dark at 4:30 in the afternoon, and every other day it got dark at 8. Weird, weird, weird. On top of all the usual weird things that happened in Huggabie Falls, one day an extremely weird thing happened. It was by far the weirdest thing that had ever happened anywhere. It was so weird that somebody should write a book about it. In fact, somebody has. You are reading it. Kip Kindle didn't read this book to find out about the extremely weird thing that happened in Huggabie Falls. He heard about it at school. His teacher, Mrs. Turgan, was late again. She was supposed to be teaching mathematics this morning. Mathematics can be quite fun, but not if it's being taught to you by an actual witch. Mrs. Turgan wore a black pointy hat, she had a big hairy wart on the end of her crooked nose, and a bumper sticker on her broomstick that read, "Honk if you want to get turned into a newt." Mrs. Turgan's classroom was more like a dungeon than a classroom. If you were a student in Mrs. Turgan's class, which unfortunately Kip and his 2 best friends, Symphony Chan and Tobias Treachery, were, then you were often too scared to lift the lid of your school desk. Inside you could find a thick book on geometry, but you were equally likely to encounter a deadly snake or a large, hungry tarantula. However, on the day the extremely weird thing happened in Huggabie Falls, there was one student who waited eagerly for the mathematics lesson to start and who happily risked being attacked by a desk-dwelling tarantula if it meant getting his hands on a tantalising geometry book, and that student was Ugg Ugg. Ugg Ugg loved mathematics, which wasn't that weird, except for the fact that Ugg was an 11-year-old troll, and trolls don't usually like mathematics. Trolls don't usually like anything other than clubbing things. Ugg didn't even own a club, but he owned 14 calculators, much to the shame of his entire troll family. Now, where was I? Oh, that's right, Miss Turgan was running late. Ugg was sitting in front of Kip and Tobias, who was sitting in front of Symphony. He turned around and frowned. I do hope Mrs. Turgan isn't away sick today. We're supposed to be doing decimals. I could hardly sleep last night, I was so excited. Kip stared at Ugg for a moment. He wondered what sort of peculiar creature got excited about decimals. He raised his eyebrows at Tobias. If you saw Kip Kindle and didn't know he was from one of the weirdest families in all of Huggabie Falls, you would think he was just an ordinary school kid, with a cheeky, up-to-no-good grin on his face, sneakers that spent more time on desks and tables than on the ground, and hair that looked like a rolling wave surging off his forehead. Let's hope Mrs. Turgan is away sick today, Kip said. Maybe we'll get a nice, friendly substitute teacher who isn't a master of the dark arts and who doesn't have blood-sucking bats for pets. Symphony looked up from her book. Terrible Turgan is here today, she said. Symphony Chan always wore her hair in a tight ponytail, yet somehow strands of it always managed to break free and tangle themselves around her glasses. She permanently had an expression on her face like she was eager to correct people, which of course she always was. In preparation for correcting people, she had learned every known fact in human history. If you wanted to know what the average wingspan of a Peruvian white-striped pelican was, then Symphony was the person to ask. I saw her, Symphony continued, up in the vulture's nest before school. Tobias gulped. The Vulture's Nest was Kip, Tobias and Symphony's nickname for Mrs. Turgan's office because it was high up in the school's old clock tower where only Mrs. Turgan on her broom could get to it. A wide smile spread across Ugg's face. She's here? Oh, good. That's a relief. A relief, Tobias treacherously said. Tobias had black hair, black clothes, and even his eye colour was black. But his face was pearl white, and that was probably because he was more scared of Mrs. Turgan than anyone. Ugh, Miss Turgan is a maniac, Tobias said. No one would actually want her to come to class. Now, if Mrs. Turgan had never shown up that day, this would be the end of the story. After only a few pages, and no one is going to want a book they can finish reading in less than 2 minutes. So I'm very relieved to inform you that Mrs. Turgan was not sick and that she did show up to teach Kip, Tobias and Symphony and Ugg 1 second later. She came sweeping in the doorway, her black cloak flowing behind her, and the terrified children scrambled back to their seats. She carried a big jar under her arm, a big jar containing a giant toad, and that giant toad looked rather dismayed. Mrs. Turgan slammed the jar down on her desk. This, children, is my husband, she announced. She said husband as if to say the selfish man who has made my life a misery for the last 20 years. Last night I cooked him his last roast dinner, and for the last time he said my cooking was ordinary. Now he's a toad, literally, which is funny considering I've always thought of him as one anyway. Now he no longer eats roast dinners, he eats only cockroaches and flies. Mrs. Turgan glared at the class with her beady, witchy eyes, and any children who have not completed their homework will soon become those very cockroaches and flies. To say the children rushed up to the front of the class to hand in their homework would be like saying it is only slightly warm in the middle of an erupting volcano. Many children were almost seriously injured in the frantic stampede to Mrs. Turgan's desk, and those who had not completed their homework, which was certainly not Ugg or, as it happened, Kip, Tobias or Symphony, slipped out of the classroom by the back door as quickly as they could, hoping Mrs. Turgan would not spot them and see to it that they ended up in her husband's green belly. When everyone who hadn't left sat back down, Mrs. Turgan removed her black pointy witch's hat and dropped it onto her desk. It landed next to a bubbling cauldron of marinated bats' tongues, which smelled like old smelly socks that had been sprayed with old smelly sock odour enhancer. Mrs. Turgan adjusted her robes and raised one bushy, disgusted eyebrow at the fidgeting children in front of her. After a long pause, Mrs. Turgan said calmly, "Who knows something about the extremely weird thing that has happened in Huggabie Falls?" Now, when a normal person in a normal town talks of something weird happening, it's usually not all that weird. And people say, "Oh, is that all?" As if to say, weird things happen all the time. The world is full of weirdness. There is no need to get excited. But if a witch, who is a teacher, talks about something extremely weird happening, then you know it must be something extremely, extremely weird. Kip glanced at Tobias and Symphony. They both looked back at him and shrugged their shoulders. "Kip Kindle," snarled Mrs. Turgan. "You always look suspicious, you obnoxious troublemaker, but you look particularly suspicious now." Kip jumped. His cheeky grin was gone, and he was suddenly frozen with fear at the sight of the angry witch, who only last week had turned Benedict Bott into a pumpkin, and the poor boy had been sitting on the classroom windowsill rotting ever since. "Honestly, Miss Turgan," Kip said, "I don't know anything about the extremely weird thing that has happened." Mrs. Turgan reached inside her robes, which is where, as everyone knew, she kept her wand. She had that look in her eye as if she was having the delicious thought of turning someone into a camel. That was when she noticed timid Henrietta Humpling's raised hand. "What is it, Mrs. Humpling?" Mrs. Turgan sighed, in a way that indicated she was upset at having her malicious and wonderful thoughts of turning Kip into a camel interrupted. Henrietta Humpling was 11. She was 1/3 vampire, 1/3 werewolf, and 1/3 Dutch. "Mrs. Turgan, what is the extremely weird thing that has happened?" she asked. An evil sneer spread across terrible Turgan's face. "You'll find out soon enough, you unfortunate little girl. In fact, all you wretched children will soon find out what the extremely weird thing that has happened is. Now I must continue with my broth. I can't waste my time teaching mathematics at a time like this." A large disappointed frown dropped across Ugg's face. But then Mrs. Turgan added, "Ugg will take the rest of the class." Ugg was overjoyed with this prospect, and with his size 18 feet and gargantuan grin, he made his way clumsily to the front of the class. Ugg pulled down the whiteboard, revealing a sentence that read, "The capital of New Zealand is Wellington, not Auckland, as most people think," which was an unusual thing to find, as there was no geography lesson this morning. But so many things in Huggabie Falls were weird, so Ugg wiped it off and proceeded to write on the whiteboard such advanced algebra that Albert Einstein would have scratched his head in bewilderment. Ugg's algebra was so torturous, in fact, that the children were almost relieved when Mrs. Turgan's broth exploded and everyone had to evacuate the classroom as quickly as possible. And that is chapter 1 of the extremely weird thing that happened in Huggabie Falls, and that sets up the mystery of what the extremely weird thing that happened is, and also a few other mysteries that get revealed as the book goes on. So, and that's about the only chapter that I can read without giving away spoilers. So,
I love it. So if you want to find out what happens, listeners, you know what you need to do. You need to get that book in your hands. If you like the sound of that book, we've got a signed copy to give away to one of our listeners. To win this, all you need to do is like, share and comment on our Writers Read by LiTracey Facebook page about why you like Adam's unique style of writing.
Rebecca recommends.
So we have had Adam Cece talk about his first book, The Extremely Weird Thing That Happened at Huggabie Falls. So I have been lucky enough to get my hands on the new book, which is The Unbelievably Scary Thing That Happened at Huggabie Falls. This book starts with the author talking to the reader, and this unique writing style features throughout the book. And you can see what I mean here with the opening pages. The trouble with sequels. If you've picked up this book, which I assume you have, otherwise how are you even reading this, then I'm sorry to tell you that this is a sequel. It's the sequel to The Extremely Weird Thing That Happened in Huggabie Falls, which of course was a spectacular book written by an equally spectacular, devilishly handsome and stupendously modest author named me. But while that book was a masterpiece, who knows whether this one will be as good. In fact, I was against writing a sequel, but so many kids have written to me wanting to know what happened next in Huggabie Falls that I found myself crumbling under the pressure. So I've dusted off my typewriter and cleared off the mess from my desk, and I've started writing about another thing that happened in Huggabie Falls, which is quite a coincidence because something unbelievable just happened in Huggabie Falls, something so unbelievable I scarcely believe it myself. But the fact that I can scarcely believe what happened isn't the biggest problem I have. The biggest problem with writing a sequel is that some of the people who pick up the sequel have not read the first book. If you are one of those people, then I'd like to ask you, what the blazes do you think you're playing at? I think you should take a good long hard look at your reading habits. So that is the start of the new book. As I said at the beginning, and the narrator did numerous times in those first few pages, this is a sequel. But don't be put off if you haven't read the first book. I haven't read the first one either, and I enjoyed this one just fine. So we have the same main characters in this book, Kip Kindle, Tobias Treachery and Symphony Chan. Baddie turned good guy Felonious Dark is also a key character in this book. Huggabie Falls is a place where nothing is normal. Weird and now scary things happen there all the time. So here are a few weird things about Huggabie Falls. All of the streets are named Digmont Drive. You would think that would be confusing, but all of the residents in town seem to find their way around just fine. Some places have extremely long and somewhat weird names, like the local restaurant cafe, the Huggabie Falls Sanctuary for people fleeing from witches and other dangerous creatures, or the Felonious Dark Reformed Evildoer Non-Evil Promotions Agency. The maths teacher is a witch, and you might just have a troll in your class. No big deal. Our three friends are used to the strange goings-on in town, so when they are enjoying the delicious donuts at the Huggabie Falls sanctuary for people fleeing from witches and other dangerous creatures, they're not too concerned when the owner, Frog and Filibuster, comes screaming from the kitchen, saying he's shutting up shop and leaving town because there is a 2-metre tall spider in the kitchen. They do start to worry when they spy a Tyrannosaurus Rex in the centre of town, tormenting the local DFA group, Dinosaur Fearers Anonymous. It seems that the good people of Huggabie Falls are being confronted by their worst fears, and perhaps it has something to do with the newest attraction in town, the House of Spooks. So the trio, with reformed evildoer Felonious Dark, make their way to the House of Spooks and find themselves on a not very scary ghost train ride. And knowing that there is more to this House of Spooks than a not very scary ghost train, they do what all of the signs tell them not to do. They get off the train and explore the house. When they find themselves in front of a door with a sign that says, "Warning, top secret lab, do not enter," they know they're in the right place. What they find behind the door is a lab that they were expecting. Conrad Creeps, Huggabie Falls' most fearful man. He is scared of everything. He's hooked up to a machine where all of his fears are projected onto a screen, and an evil scientist who looks remarkably like Felonious Dark. It turns out that this evil scientist had found a way to extract people's worst fears and create scare balls. And scare balls project the recipient's very worst fears, whether it's giant spiders, dinosaurs, or Brussels sprouts talking in a Scottish accent. Kip, Tobias, Symphony, and reformed evildoer Felonious Dark have to overcome their worst fears, figure out why this is happening, and figure out a way to stop it. If you like funny books full of quirky characters and not so very scary things, then this book is a must for you. The first book that Adam Cece wrote was not part of the Huggabie Falls series. It was a book called Wesley Booth Super Sleuth. It is a mystery story. The title kind of gives that away. But it's not just that. It's a story that is relatable to all readers. It's filled with characters and storylines that we recognise, like best friends, bullies, annoying newcomers, annoying siblings, teachers, good, bad and slightly odd, parents, trouble at home and school life in general. It's also a very funny book, and it may even make you laugh out loud. Here are some of the main characters. Wesley Booth, self-proclaimed super sleuth. Wesley's mum. She's quit her job to follow her dream, and now she has a gift basket business, but the drop in income means that they are struggling to make ends meet at home. Wesley's dad. He's a geologist, makes a lot of terrible dad jokes about rocks. Wesley's brother thinks he's a rock god, and he loves to torment Wesley any chance he gets. Then we've got Cassidy Strong, Wesley's nemesis, a new girl at school vying for the coveted title of Super Sleuth. Eamon is Wesley's best friend. He's very smart, and his once trusted assistant is now a Cassidy Strong devotee. Gruber, he's the new assistant, slightly weird, easily distracted, probably not the best assistant. And Neville, he is more than a little obsessed with death, reads vampire novels and only wears black. Then there's Mr. Tam, maths teacher, thinks he's cool. He's pretty much the only one that thinks that. Now, on with the story. The first crime. Gruber's bike gets stolen. Wesley collects clues. There's only one. A red, black and yellow lolly wrapper. And as Wesley is still collecting the evidence, newcomer Cassidy takes it upon herself to solve the crime, claiming that it could only be the builders as they have access to bolt cutters. And she and her father confront the workmen and compensation is paid to Gruber. Case solved. But Wesley thinks otherwise, especially as he is 99% sure that Gruber did not actually lock his bike, even though Gruber had a note written on his arm in black texter that said, "Don't forget to chain up your bike." His suspicions are confirmed when a few days later the school's secretary's handbag is stolen. There's another lolly wrapper at the scene. It seems there is a crime wave at Hub Hill Primary School. Wesley's powers of deduction are second to none, and as he slowly but surely pieces the puzzle pieces together, he feels that the lolly wrappers are the key to finding the thief, and as they are the only clue that linked both crime scenes together. The wrappers are red, black and yellow, the same colour as the German flag, which leads him to the only German staff member, Mr. Kraus, the school janitor. Now, that only takes us up to page 67, so you can guess that the mystery does not get solved that easily, especially when Wesley finds out that half the kids in the school are eating these lollies. Wesley Booth is one of those characters you can't help but love. The kind of kid that is quirky, funny, nice, the kind of character you want to be friends with. Or in my case, my 10-year-old self would have liked to have been friends with. So make sure you get your hands on this one to find out if Wesley really does solve the case before Cassidy Strong does.
Hi, I'm Adam Cece, and you're listening to the Writers Read podcast.
For those of you who have never met Adam before, he is such a lovely, gentle soul who has incredible passion for children's literature. This was one of my favourite chats so far. He made it so easy for me to learn about him as a reader, and I'm so glad to be able to share this chat with you now. So Adam, I'm sure that most times you're out talking with schools and people in the industry, you're talking about your life as a writer. Mm-hmm. This podcast is focused on you as a reader. So we're going to be focusing in on your reading life and who you are as a reader.
Cool.
So recently I read a quote that said that readers are formed out of their experiences. And so I was wondering, what are your earliest memories of reading?
Well, I think I remember one of my first favourite books was Wind in the Willows, but I didn't read it. It was a book that my mum read to me, and I loved it. I was completely obsessed with it, and but it also really upset me because I always used to say to my mum, when am I going to be able to read books myself? I hated my mum reading it to me, and I would just look at the page and there's all these words on there. And I can remember even way back as a 4-year-old thinking, I don't understand what any of this is, and I don't know how I'm ever going to be able to actually do what my mum is doing and read this book. And my mum would say to me, it's fine, you'll be able to read it yourself in no time, you'll learn how to read. And I was very adamant with my mum. I said, how do you know? You can't know this. You can't know that someone's going to learn how to read. So I didn't believe her. I was like, well, do some people not learn to read? And mum would say, well, yeah, some people can't read. And that horrified me. I thought, right, that's going to be me. I'm going to be the kid that won't be able to learn how to read, and I'll never be able to read Wind in the Willows to myself. So that just horrified me as a child. So actually my earliest memories of reading are a little bit horrific because it's the fear that I would never actually be able to pick up reading. Even though my mum assured me that I would, I was always petrified that I wouldn't be able to read. So that's probably my earliest memory, which is not a good memory, really. Yeah.
No, but would you say that that was the book that launched you as a reader, or was there something further along the track that really, how you would say turned you into a reader?
I think that was a book I loved as a kid. I also loved Clouded with a Chance of Meatballs. I remember loving that as a young child, and I always liked reading. And then I remember we lived in New Zealand for a couple of years when I was in year 6 and 7, and I read a graphic novel series over there called Terry and the Gunrunners as part of this Terry Teo series. And I remember loving that, like being obsessed with that book and carrying it around with me. And that was, and that led on to me reading things like Asterix and Tintin and all that sort of stuff. And they're the first books I really remember being obsessed with, and they were graphic novels. And then I think somehow that just led to me wanting to read everything after that. So that was like my gateway to becoming really obsessed with reading, because I got really obsessed with the world and really started to think of a book as more than just a book, but like an entry into this whole other world that you could explore. And I think it also had something to do with me living in New Zealand, and I read a lot because I left all my friends behind and found all these new friends in books. I think I only went to a small school that had like 30 students in it, and so I had one friend at that school, and like when he wasn't available, then I didn't have anyone to play with. So I remember reading a lot of books when I was in New Zealand. So I think that's, when I think back, that's my real love of reading developed. Yeah.
Did you ever reflect back on that moment when you thought, I'm never going to become a reader, this is going to be too hard and I can't do this? And did you ever stop to think, wow, look at me now, I'm reading all of these diverse books?
No, I don't know. I think I always liked reading. I don't think it ever dropped away for me. I know a lot of young kids, they say they get to, maybe it's the teen years or whatever, and they stop reading. But I always had an interest in reading, but it was never exclusively. Like I was obsessed with movies and TV shows and as iPads and iPhones and all that were invented, I'm obsessed with technology and video games and stuff. But reading was always there as well. So I don't like it when people sort of say, all this other technology is getting kids away from reading, because for me, they always complement each other. And I found a lot of movies that I loved, I then found the books of those movies, like The Princess Bride. I remember watching that movie and loving that movie. It's still one of my favourite movies. And then discovering the book and loving the book, and vice versa, reading a lot of books and then discovering the movies, which I think is the better way to do it. Even though I did it the opposite way around with Princess Bride. I remember Harry Potter, watching the first 3 Harry Potter movies before I read a Harry Potter book. But yeah, so I think that I've always loved reading, even though all this other stuff has been competing as well. But I've always had reading's always been there for me all the way through, and yeah, it still is. Yeah.
So that's obviously a real strength of yours, that you've got a strong reading life. And I think I resonate with what you say about movies and books, and that's often the way that children find their way into books and start to build their own reading life. But I notice that they also tend to develop a relationship with an author or a particular genre through their reading. So when you think about your life as a reader, is there an author or genre that you felt that I guess you either developed a relationship with or a penchant for a particular style of writing?
Well, I think I always liked funny stories, and I think when I was a teenager, I read books like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Red Dwarf and books like that, and I loved those books. And I remember really feeling like the characters in those books were real people to me. And I remember we used to have reading time when I was in about, maybe it was year 9 or 10, and I remember I used to read Red Dwarf and the various Red Dwarf books in reading time. And I would just be cracking up laughing in class, and my teacher made me sit out in the hall because I was laughing too much and disturbing other people. And then I remember thinking, I want to be able to write funny stories. So that's where it really sparked in me. And I'd already been writing. I remember writing short stories when I was in primary school and stuff like that, and always thinking this would be a cool idea to actually write your own stories. But that's when I read those books going through high school. I then wrote a book called The Fourth Galaxy Past, that big red one was my book, which is a complete rip-off of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yes. And I could never publish it because I would get sued because it's so close. But that was like my first full-length. That was 90-something thousand words. So all of a sudden I read these books and thought, I'm going to become a writer. And so that was my first completed. And then I'd achieved something which a lot of writers never achieve in actually writing a full-length book. And then I thought, wow, I've written 90,000 words because I was so enthusiastic about this genre, and I've kept writing funny stuff ever since. But I think, middle grade is where I sort of stopped, because all the books that I love, all the middle grade books, and now all the ones that I still reread and had a real big impact on shaping me were middle grade books. And so I think that's why I end up writing middle grade books, because I want to try and write books that have a huge impact on kids and shape them a little bit, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And the thing that really drives me in my work is helping children obviously find that book that launches their life as a reader.
Yeah.
But through that, what I notice is they really start to develop an identity as a reader. And I think that there's somewhere along the line, there's misconceptions about who a good reader is.
Yeah.
And it could be that a good reader is someone who reads big books, or who finishes every book, or who sits and reads quietly and doesn't laugh out loud at the funny bits.
Yeah.
And there's these kind of misconceptions around who a good reader is, or what a good reader is. One of the things I think that children think is that they need to like all books and read all books, and they need to read them from beginning to end. And when you reveal to them, when I tell them my least favoured genres, for example, they're like, oh, really, you're a librarian and there's books that you don't like to read, and they feel relieved that they think, well, and then that helps them to identify with adult proficient readers in their life to think, well, if this is how adults approach the task of reading, this is okay for me as well. And so were there ever, or are there genres that you find it harder to connect to than others?
I think so. I think I actually find it, my reading life now, and I think throughout a lot of my life, I was talking about having various competing things for my reading. I find books, really thick, dense fantasy books like Game of Thrones and things like that I start reading them as lots of characters. But I think I agree with what you're saying. People have this idea of readers being people who go and sit in a corner and you have to read for an hour and it has to be quiet. And I am totally like, I read one page because I've just got time to read one page, and then that might be the only page I read for the day, but I snuck that in 2 minutes, and always carrying a book around with me. And I think kids especially can do that. They can have an iPad or something they're playing, and then they might just put that down and pick up a book for like a minute or something. But that's very much how my reading happens in little, and also my writing, coincidentally, is all in bits and pieces, and just stolen moments all day. I love it when you've just got 10 minutes and they say, oh, it's going to be another 10-minute wait, and you're like, oh, no problems. So I can read for 10 minutes then and just steal those moments away. But thick books, and you were saying about not finishing books, I am a classic for reading the first 50 pages, and then for some reason I won't read for 3 days, and then I won't be able to get back into that book because I've lost it. It's got too many complex storylines and characters. So I think the real big, dense fantasies in that, I really like the genre of fantasy, but I find myself not reading those books very much because there's too much going on, and I sometimes will put a book down and pick up another one, and I'll just get lost. I'm very much all over the place with my reading. So those books, I end up getting a bit lost in them and thinking, who was this character? I don't remember who this character was. And like, I don't know why this seed's important all of a sudden. And then I'll be sort of lost from that book and I'll put it down. But I'm a classic for putting books down after 50 pages, and like I'm a bit of a life's too short, and if it's not grabbing me, then I'm just going to move on to another book. And that's why we have so many books at home that like we can't store them everywhere because I've bought them all and then I've read 50 pages that I put them aside. I think I'm going to go back to that one day, and but I never do because there's always new books coming out.
Well, I think you make a really valuable point that is important for children to hear, that as adult readers, we'll have several books on the go at once that we're dipping in and out of. And I think the more I think about this, the more reflective it is of lots of things in our life, but a really thick, dense book that takes a lot of concentration. We don't always have the time and energy for that. And we need the right time and space to be able to read that in the way we want to read it. And that's an important message for children as well, and one that I try to instill with, I expect when children are choosing books that they have 3 to 5 books, not all necessarily novels, that sometimes we just don't feel like reading a novel. We want a light read, and that's okay because that's what we do. In the real world, that's what readers really do.
Yeah, look, I just read the book, now I've got to remember who it's by, but it's called Holes.
Louis Sachar?
Yeah, something along those lines, yeah. And that was my perfect book. It was sort of short, punchy, had this real simple to follow storyline, but it had it really resonated, had these real great themes in it, and it's just like... it was my perfect book, and I thought, this is perfect. I want to find every book to be exactly like this. And I've tried to do that with classics as well. I've lost track of the number of times I've tried to read Moby Dick, and I'm never going to read that book. I feel like I remember thinking when I was a young reader, I should read all these classics because that's what you do. You read all the classics and stuff. But most of them fall into those real dense books, hard to get into. Some of them go 300 pages before they even get anywhere, and so many classics I've put down and not been able to, I haven't been able to get into and just put them down. And then I kept going back to them, but now I've stopped going back to them. I thought, it's not going to happen. I've just got to move on to other books. And so I think kids should just play around with books and try and find out what really works for them, like young readers should, find those perfect books and then once they do, there's going to be plenty of those books. There's so many books out there, so they don't have to spend time trying to churn through a Moby Dick or some huge tome when they can just find fun books. They can find anything, unless that's what they like to read, obviously. Some people love to read thick books because they can get really engrossed in the story and spend a lot of time in that world. But, I think it's just about finding what you love,
Absolutely. I read Holes, and it's one of those books that I couldn't put down.
Yeah, I read it all in one night. So,
And it was one of those books I was, cooking out of the stovetop and reading it. And
I was walking around the house,
Absolutely. And then that great moment where it was actually part of a book club I was running at the school I was in, and to see the students the next day, because we'd set a goal of how many chapters we were going to read each night, and just to hear the buzz around that book. And that's what I love, is when a book really lights you up, and it lights students up, and particularly for a student who hasn't identified as being a reader, to see the way that a book such as that can launch their life as a reader is so exciting. And
because that's a short book, but you can get so much out of it. It's just incredible. And there's so many, if you were using it in a classroom environment, so there's so many things to talk about in that book. But yet it's so accessible, easy to read, quick to read, and yeah, and it really just moves along at a fantastic pace. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
We've done a good promo for that.
Yeah, we have. I know. We're talking about your
probably
books.
Doesn't need a promo. I think it's quite a successful book. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think the point is that when children do find that book that they can't put down, it's exciting for them. It's exciting for me. And from there, you're looking for them to build a reading ladder. If you like this book, then you might like this book. And then as it builds, as I said, they often identify or build that relationship with an author or series. But then when you see them branch out from there, it's even more exciting. And they have this sort of broad repertoire of authors and genres and series that they read is really what's really gratifying in my work. But I find that the challenge is always that book, getting that one book.
Yeah, entry book, yeah.
Yep. And what advice would you give our listeners who walk into a library or a bookshop and they get that shelf shock? There's so many books, I don't know where to start. Have you got any tips or advice that you could pass along?
My only real tip is to talk to a librarian or talk to a teacher or talk to because that's the biggest. There's lots of discussion about things like Big W and stuff like that. Department stores coming with their book sections and they don't feature people talking about books. For me, I remember talking to the librarian, and you just get to know them and they find out what sort of books you like, and they always have got a book for you to read. And then in my day, it was like you come back and say, no, I didn't like that. And then they start building a little bit of a idea of what you like and what you don't like. And that's why they're so valuable, basically, because they can, they know, and it's more about the readers and them learning what you like. So that would be my advice. Talk to your librarian or talk to bookshop people, and there's so many books, so they will know what you can get into. So
absolutely,
yeah.
Thank you for sharing your time with us.
It felt so fast.
Yeah, well, it did feel really fast. Lots of valuable tips for young people to get that book in their hands. So thanks for your time, Adam.
Thank you.
Tracey's tip.
Adam mentioned that he always carries a book around with him and that he steals moments away to read, even if it's just one page. This is something that the book whisperer Donald Miller also talks about. I love her phrase. She says she carries books with her wherever she goes as part of her boredom insurance. She doesn't want to be stuck somewhere bored and with nothing to read. Donald muses that we don't often have a chunk of time available to just read, but by having a book on the ready ensures that when time appears, we can steal those moments to read. If we want to keep our reading momentum going, Donald says that we need to find ways to fit reading into the edges of our time. And to do this, like Adam suggests, most readers steal it. It might be 10 minutes before bed, in the car on the way to footy practice, or while waiting at a bus stop. In her new book, Game Changer, co-authored with Colby Sharp, Donald says that sneaky readers are everywhere. If you take a moment to think about your own class, I'm sure you can picture the student who walks from place to place reading a book, or who secretly reads under the desk while you're teaching, for example. Donald urges us to model and teach kids how to find small opportunities in the day to steal reading time. She says that these small chunks of time can snowball into a staggering amount of reading time. Teacher and instructional coach Kristen Zimke explicitly instructs her students in the art of sneaky reading. She says that as a class they define what it means to be a sneaky reader, and they look for opportunities to practice this craft. This might be something that you'd like to try with your own class, and from there you could jointly construct sneaky places to read both inside and outside of school, so that it becomes part of your class's reading habits. Kristen says this practice is a way that children can advocate for their own reading life wherever they find themselves. A great way to document this could be for students to photograph and display all of the different places they practice sneaky reading. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode with our reader-in-residence, Adam Cece, as much as I enjoyed chatting with him. Remember, you can win a signed copy of his book, The Extremely Weird Thing That Happened in Huggabie Falls, by liking, sharing and commenting on our Writers Read by LiTracey Facebook page. On the next Writers Read podcast, we hear from Sydney-based author Belinda Morell. She's going to read aloud from her latest Pippa's Island book, Camp Castaway, and you'll find out about her life as a reader.
Writers Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Writers Read by LiTracey. a Dave and the Beanstalk production.